Overcoming obstacles. Orison Swett Marden. The most loaded words in our language are also the shortest, yes and no. One means gratification, the other character. One means gratification, the other character. A resounding no means a strong character, while a quick yes means a weak character, regardless of how we justify it. The world is a marketplace, where everything is marked at a fixed price. Whatever we buy with our time, labor, or ingenuity, be it wealth, ease, fame, integrity or knowledge, we must stand firm in our decision. We should not behave like children who, after acquiring something, regret that they do not possess more. A man must master his company, and not let it master him. He must have the power to decide immediately which way he will make his mistakes. When Rome was besieged by the Gauls in the time of the Republic, the Romans were so hard-pressed, that they agreed to buy immunity with gold. Legend has it that they were about to weigh it, when Camillus appeared on the scene, threw his sword into the balance instead of the ransom, and declared that the Romans would not buy peace, but would win it with the sword. This act of boldness and prompt decision, so excited the Romans, that they swept triumphantly from sacred ground, the enemy of their peace. In an emergency, the arrival of a quick, decisive and confident man who takes action, even if it is not always the right one, can transform the situation in his favor. Such a man arrives on the scene, like a cool breeze coming down from the mountain top, bringing nourishment to a bewildered and indecisive crowd. When Antiochus Epiphanes invaded Egypt, which was then under the protection of Rome, the Romans sent an ambassador, who met Antiochus near Alexandria, and ordered him to withdraw. The invader responded with evasions. The brave Roman surrounded the king with his sword, and forbade him to cross the line until he had given his answer. Thanks to the quick decision of the intrepid ambassador, the invader was forced to retreat, and war was averted. The prompt decision of the Romans made them win many battles, and dominate the world. All the great achievements in the history of the world are the result of a quick and firm decision. The men who have left their mark in their century have been men of great and prompt decision. An indecisive man, a man who always hesitates between two opinions, who always debates which of two courses to pursue, proclaims his indecision, and cannot control himself, is destined to be possessed by others. He is not a man, he is only a satellite. The determined man, the prompt man, does not wait for favorable circumstances, does not submit to events, events must submit to him. The hesitant man is always at the mercy of the opinion of the last one who spoke to him. He may see the right thing, but he strays into the wrong thing. If he decides on a path, he only follows it until someone opposes him. When Julius Caesar arrived at Rubicon, a place considered sacred and immovable, on the border of Italy, even his great determination was compromised. For he considered invading a territory, which no general could enter, without the permission of the Senate. However, he was faced with the choice of self-destructing himself, or destroying his country, and his audacity did not long waver. "The die is cast," he exclaimed as he threw himself into the current, at the head of his legions. That firm decision completely changed the history of the world. The man who said, "I came, I saw, and I conquered," could not have hesitated long. He, like Napoleon, had the power to choose a course, and sacrifice all conflicting plans. The instant he landed with his troops in Brittany, the inhabitants decided never to surrender. Caesar's quick mind, he saw that he must commit his soldiers, to victory or death, in order to extinguish all hope of retreat. He burned all the ships which had brought them to the shores of Britain. There was no hope of return, it was victory or death. This action was the key to the character and triumphs of this great warrior. The sublime decision of Satan in Paradise Lost, after being banished from heaven, incites admiration. After a few moments of terrible suspense, he resumes his invincible spirit, and expresses that sublime phrase, "What does it matter where, if I remain the same?" The power to make a quick decision about the best way forward is one of the most powerful forces for success. It involves sacrificing all opposing motives, and once sacrificed, silencing them forever, and not allowing their claims to distract us from our path. To vacillate is to be lost, and in fact, the man who is always going in circles, hesitating and wasting time, shuffling and bargaining, weighing and balancing, discussing unimportant things, paying attention to every motive that presents itself, will never achieve anything. There is not enough positivity in him. The negative man does not build confidence, and only invites distrust. However, the positive and determined man is powerful in the world, and represents something that can be measured and calibrated. You can value his work by the energy he will use. It is told of Alexander the Great that, when asked how he had conquered the world, he replied, "Not hesitating." When at midnight, the ship Stephen Whitney hit an Irish cliff, and clung for a few moments to him, all passengers who jumped to the rock, were saved. This action brought them to safety, but those who remained, were swept away by the returning wave, and were buried forever. The hesitant man is never a quick man, and without speed, success is not possible. Great opportunities, not only come seldom to the most fortunate life, but often, they disappear quickly. A man without decision, says John Foster, can never say that he belongs to himself. For, if he dared to assert it, the feeble force of some cause as powerful as a spider, might seize upon the unhappy braggart the next minute. Showing with contempt, the futility of having trusted in the autonomy, of his understanding and will. It belongs to everything that can catch him, and one thing after another claims its right to him, stopping him as he tries to move on. Just like twigs and splinters floating near the bank of a river, when they are intercepted, by grass and little eddies. A determined man, not only saves time, but also energy and vitality, unlike the one, who analyzes each argument from two perspectives, and weighs them until he finds a balance, without deciding on one in particular. Therefore, finding himself in equilibrium, he does not move absolutely by his own will, but through any will of another. There would be more punctual and determined men, if only they would learn to always act quickly. A man with these characteristics, can do twice as much as an indecisive and lazy one, who never knows what he wants. A quick decision saved Napoleon, Grant and his armies, on many occasions. In the beginning of everything, when God created the heavens and the earth was disordered and empty, and darkness covered it. God said, if they had delayed, it would have been fatal. Napoleon used to say, that although a battle could last a whole day, usually in a few critical minutes, the fate of the combat was decided. With an amazing will, which extended its influence over much of Europe, showed the same speed and decisiveness, both in the small details of leadership, as in major battles. His determination and speed of action allowed him to astonish the world with his marvelous successes. He seemed to be everywhere at once. What he could accomplish in a day, amazed everyone who knew him. He seemed to electrify everyone around him, and his invincible energy was contagious throughout the army. He could incite even the dullest troops to immediate and enthusiastic action, and inspire courage in the stupidest of men. He would stay up all night if necessary, after riding more than 190 kilometers, dealing with correspondence, dispatches and details. What a lesson for lazy, hesitant and half-hearted men. The hesitation of Charles V, says Motley, changed the destinies of the civilized world. The views of President Washington were so powerful in directing the actions of the people that, at the conclusion of the session of Congress, Jefferson sent the following letter to Monroe in Paris. You will see by his proceedings, the truth of what I have always told you. A man surpasses all in influence, when he supports his judgment, as opposed to that of his representatives. Republicanism resigns the ship to the pilot. There is no vocation or occupation, which does not present difficulties. The young man who allows himself to hesitate, every time he reaches a difficult place in life, will not succeed. Without decision, there can be no concentration, and to succeed, a man must concentrate. The indecisive cannot concentrate, he dissipates his energy, disperses his forces and does not execute anything. He cannot hold on to one thing long enough to achieve success. A vocation or occupation presents him with its positive aspect, he feels sure of what he wants to do and full of enthusiasm, he adopts it as his life's work. But after a few days, the thorns begin to appear, his enthusiasm evaporates, and he wonders why he thinks he is fit for that vocation. What his friend adopted is much more suitable for him, he abandons his and adopts another. Thus he vacillates through life, being carried away by whatever new occupation attracts him, and never using his judgment or common sense, but being guided by his perceptions and feelings of the moment. Such people are never guided by principles, never knowing where to find them. Today they are here and tomorrow there, they are doing one thing or another, throwing away all the skill they had acquired by mastering the monotony of the last occupation. In reality, they never get far enough in anything to overcome the stage of monotony and move on to the remunerative and satisfying stage. They go through life in the beginning of occupations, where they always find it most pleasant to be. These people rarely reach the stage of competence, comfort and satisfaction. Legend has it that a powerful genie promised a beautiful maiden a valuable gift if she went through a cornfield without stopping, backing up or deviating, choosing only the largest and ripest ear. The value of the gift was to be proportional to the size and perfection of the ear. She passed many magnificent ears, although she was so anxious to get the largest and most perfect, that she went on without plucking any until, as she went along, she came across smaller and flimsier ones. Finally, they became so small, that she was ashamed to select one of them, and, not being allowed to turn back, she came out the other side without one. Alexander the Great, with heart throbbing for a great purpose, conquers the world. Hannibal, driven by his hatred of the Romans, crosses even the Alps to fulfill his plan. While other men lament the difficulties, and hide from dangers and obstacles, the great soul, without causing fuss or noise, takes the step forward. In that way, overcoming the mountain, opens the way. You must learn, then, to love with determination and strength. Stabilize your wandering life, and do not allow it to be blown to and fro, like a withered leaf by all the winds that blow. An indecisive man is like a turnstile at a fair, he hinders everyone, but stops no one. The secret of the whole affair, replied Amos Lawrence, was that we had acquired the habit of acting promptly, thus taking advantage of the crest of the tide. Whereas the habit of others was to wait until we were near mid-tide, so as to reach the shallows. Most of the young people who are lost in our cities are ruined by their inability to say no to the thousand attractions and temptations which present themselves before their weak passions. If they were firm and decisive from the beginning, a resounding no could silence forever those who ask them for something. However, they are weak, they are afraid to offend, they do not like to say no. So they give up, and soon they are on the road to ruin. A little decisiveness at an early age will soon conquer the right to take care of their own affairs. An ancient legend tells us that a fool and a wise man were traveling together, and came to a point where two roads opened before them, one broad and beautiful, and the other narrow and rugged. The fool wished to take the attractive road, while the wise man knew that the rough road was the shorter and safer, and so decided. However, in the end the fool's urgency prevailed, and they took the more attractive path. Soon they were overtaken by robbers, who seized their goods and seized them. Soon after, both they and their captors were arrested by the agents of the law, and brought before the judge. Then, the wise man claimed that the fault was the fault of the fool, for having wanted to take the wrong path. The fool said that he was only a fool, and that no sensible man should have listened to his advice. The judge punished both equally. If sinners attract you, do not indulge them. There is no habit that grows so much in the soul, as that of want of decision. Before a man knows what he has done, he has staked his life, because he never knew what to do with it. On many of the tombstones, of those who have failed in life, you can read between the lines, he was delayed, behind in time, procrastination, listlessness, inertia, nervousness, always behind. How tragic are the failures, which occur close to success and happiness. Shipwrecks and misfortunes, which lie just behind success, and just this side of happiness, are reminders of the caution we must take in life. Webster said of that indecisive man, that he is like the sea, when the tide changes. This man neither advances nor recedes, he simply floats. Such a man is at the mercy of any fortuitous event that may befall him. His days are wasted in lamenting the lost days. He lacks the ability to take control of the events that come his way, and put them to work to his advantage. For lazy, disinterested and apathetic people, life becomes a dull process. They do not realize that constantly postponing things delays their personal development, capabilities and achievements. Their contagion infects their entire neighborhood. Lincoln used to warn young people about the habit of dawdling, which creeps into every crevice of unoccupied time, and often ruins a brilliant life. His motto should be, as he said, do it instantly. This is the only way not to waste time. How many hours have been wasted in bed dreading getting up? Many careers have been paralyzed by it. Burton could not overcome this habit, and convinced that it would ruin his success, he made his servant promise before going to bed, to get him up at such an hour. The servant called him several times, but Burton begged him to let him sleep a little longer. The servant, knowing that he would lose his shilling if he did not get up, poured cold water on the bed, and Burton jumped up. When someone asked a lazy young man about what made him stay in bed so long, he replied, I am engaged in listening to advice every morning. Industry advises me to get up, laziness to stay still, and they give me 20 reasons for and against. It's up to me, as an impartial judge, to hear everything that can be said on both sides, and by the time the case is over, dinner is ready. There is no doubt that, as a rule, great determination is usually accompanied by great strength of character. Men who have been noted for great firmness of character have been, as a rule, strong and determined. There is no quality of mind, which is not sympathetic with bodily weakness, and this is true of the power of decision, which is generally affected or weakened by physical ailments. As a rule, it is the physically strong man who carries the weight and conviction. Any bodily weakness, attitude, lack of tone or vigor, is perhaps the first thing that is felt, when we do not know how to make good decisions. There is nothing that inspires greater confidence, and attracts more quickly, the help of the bank, or of a friend, than the reputation of punctuality. The world knows that a punctual man will pay his bills on time, and therefore can be trusted. Let your first study be to teach the world, that you are not made of wood and straw, that there is some iron in you. Let men know that what you say you will do, that your decision, once made, is final without hesitation. That once resolved, you will not be seduced or intimidated. Some minds are so rigid, that they feel bewildered every time a responsibility is imposed on them. They are quite afraid to decide anything. The mere effort to arrive at a decision, immediate and unwavering, causes all sorts of doubts, difficulties and fears to arise. And it seems that they cannot have enough light to make a decision, nor enough courage to try to remove the obstacle. They know that indecision is fatal to enterprise, fatal to progress, and fatal to success. Yet somehow they seem to be destined to an unhealthy introspection that keeps them in a constant state of uncertainty. They have energy enough to weigh motives, but have nothing left to propel them into action. They analyze, deliberate, weigh, consider and reflect, but never act. How many men regret their failure in life, having failed to seize the unique opportunity that came their way, at the right time, when it was within their grasp. It was rumored that Napoleon had an officer who possessed a profound knowledge of the tactics of war, even superior to that of his own commander. However, he lacked that ability to make quick decisions, and to maintain a powerful concentration, which characterized the great military leaders of the world. There were several generals under Grant, who mastered the tactics of war, knew the country just as well, and were better educated. But they lacked that power of decision, of not surrendering to the enemy, under any circumstances. Grant's decision was like an inevitable destiny, there was no turning back, no possibility of reconsidering it. It was his decision, which was expressed in those memorable words, which said, "At Wilderness I propose to fight on these lines, even if it takes me all summer." And that he returned the words, "unconditional surrender," to General Wagner, who asked him for conditions of capitulation. This gave the first confidence to the North that the rebellion was doomed. At last, Lincoln had a general with power of decision, and the North breathed easy for the first time. The man who would go to the front in this competitive age, must be a man of quick decision and determination. Like Caesar, he must burn his ships behind him, and make retreat forever impossible. When he unsheathes his sword, he must throw away the scabbard, lest in a moment of discouragement and crisis, he should be tempted to sheathe it. He must nail his colors to the mast, as Nelson did in battle, determined to go down with his ship, if he cannot win. Quick decision and boldness have led many successful men to overcome dangerous crises, where deliberation would have been ruin. Observation as a factor of success. Henry Ward Beecher was not so foolish as to think that he could get ahead, without systematic study and a thorough knowledge of the world of books. "When I first went to Brooklyn," Beecher said, "the men doubted whether I could support myself. I told them to give me time without interruption, until 9 o'clock every morning, and that I did not care what came after that." He studied hard for 4 hours every morning. Those who saw him, imagined that afterwards, he collected the material for his sermons in the street. However, it is true, that many of the most valuable things about his preaching, he learned in the street. "Where does Mr. Beecher get his sermons?" asked all the young and ambitious clergymen in the country. And on one occasion he replied, "I keep my eyes open, and ask questions." This is the secret of success for many men, keep your eyes open and ask questions. Although Beecher was a reader, with wide interest in different subjects, he did not care much for the writings of theologians. Christ was his great model, and he knew that he did not look for his sermons in the writings of the Sanhedrin. But he collected them as he walked along the banks of the Jordan and over the hills, through the meadows and villages of Galilee. He saw that the strength of this great teacher's sermons lay in their simplicity, in their naturalness. Beecher's sermons were very simple, wholesome and motivating. They pulsated with life, they had the vigor of the bright red blood in them, because, like those of Christ, they grew out of doors, that is to say, he obtained them everywhere in life and nature. He picked them up in the market, on Wall Street, in the stores. He got them from the brakeman, from the mechanic, from the blacksmith, from the newsboy, from the train conductor, from the clerk, from the lawyer, from the doctor, and from the businessman. He did not watch the unfolding of the great human battle from his study, as many did. He himself got into the thick of the struggle, and stood amidst the smoke and din, where the battle of life was at its fiercest. He was studying his great problems. Now it was the problem of slavery, again the problem of government, of commerce or education, anything that affected the lives of men. He was aware of everything. The great, busy, ambitious world, throbbed for him everywhere. Once he tasted the power and usefulness of the study of real life, when he saw that real stories were far more cogent and interesting than any other book, except the Bible. He was never again satisfied, without knowing the life stories of the people, whom he met every day. Beecher believed that a sermon was a failure, when he failed to get a large mass of listeners, to go away with a new determination, in order to be more for themselves. and to do their work better, to be more conscientious, more helpful, more determined to do their part in the world. This great observer was not only a student of human nature, but also of all nature in general. I saw him many times, absorbedly contemplating the beauties of a wonderful landscape, taking in the grandeur and sublimity of the great white mountains which he loved so much, and where he spent many summers. He always preached on Sundays, in the hotel where he stayed, and large crowds came from everywhere, for the purpose of listening to him. There was something in his sermons which brought out the best in the listener. They were filled with images of beautiful landscapes and fascinating sunsets. They reflected the clouds, the rain, the sun and the storm, the flowers, the fields and the streams. The evidence of creation imprinted on rocks and mountains, which intermingled with fairies, steam cars, orphans, calamities, accidents, all kinds of life experiences. The joy and brightness of the sun shared space with the grim poverty of the slums. In the same place people lay, in sick beds and in the final moments of their lives, surrounded by hospitals and funeral ceremonies. Vital images of success and failure, of the discouraged, the despondent, the cheerful, the optimistic and the pessimistic, passed in rapid succession, and were burned into the brains of his avid listeners. Wherever he went, Beecher continued his study of life, through observation, and nothing else was half so interesting to him. Man was the greatest study in the world. He considered that one of the greatest achievements of a clergyman was to give men the right values, and to bring out the best in them. To be able to differentiate between the genuine and the false, to be able to pierce their masks, and read the real man or woman, who was behind them. Like Professor Assis, who could see wonders in the scale of a fish, or in a gram of sand, Beecher had an eye like the glass of a microscope, which revealed wonders in common things. He could see beauty and harmony, where others saw only ugliness and discord, because he read the hidden meaning of things. Like Ruskin, he could see the marvelous philosophy, and the divine plan in the smallest objective. He could feel the divine presence, in all created things. Thorough observation, says Herbert Spencer, is an element of all great success. There is no profession or situation, in which a trained eye may not become a determining factor in success. Let's leave it to Osler, said the doctors in a consultation, in which a precious life hung in the balance. Then, the great professor of the Johns Hopkins, examined the patient. He asked no questions, his experienced eye drew a conclusion, from the slightest evidence. He watched the patient closely, the way he breathed, the look of his eyes, everything was revealing in his condition, which he read like an open book. He saw symptoms that others could not see. He recommended an operation, which was carried out, and the patient recovered. Most of those present disagreed with him. But such was his confidence in his power to diagnose a case through symptoms and indications, that they escaped most physicians, who were willing to leave all decisions in his hands. Professor Osler was known as a living X-ray machine, with additional eyes in his fingertips. He was so familiar with anatomy that he could detect a minute growth or displacement which was imperceptible to ordinary vision. The power inherent in a trained faculty of observation is priceless. The education that Beecher gained through observation, by keeping his eyes, ears and mind open, meant much more to him, and to the world of university education. He was not a great scholar, and he did not go as high in college, as some of his peers, whom he far surpassed in life, but his mind penetrated to the heart of things. Lincoln was another remarkable example, that one can be educated through observation. His mind would pause, question and extract meaning from everything that was supposed to be within his grasp. Wherever he went, he always had a question. Everything he saw, had to reveal its secret, before he let it go. He had a passion for knowledge, he longed to know the meaning of things, the philosophy that intruded, among the common and everyday occurrences. Ruskin says, "Hundreds of people can speak through one who can think, but thousands can think through one who can see." I once traveled abroad with two young men, one of whom was all eyes, nothing seemed to escape him, and the other never saw anything. The next day, on leaving a city, the second could hardly remember that, which had caused him no interest, while the first had a genius for absorbing knowledge of all kinds, through the eyes. Such trivial things, which his companion did not notice at all, meant a lot to him. He was a poor student, but he brought home rich treasures, from across the sea. The other young man was comparatively rich, and brought home almost nothing of value. While visiting recently, Loutherbourg Bank, the horticultural wizard in his famous garden, I was much impressed with his wonderful power of seeing things. He has observed the habits of fruits and flowers, with such purpose, that he has performed miracles, in the field of floriculture and horticulture. Stunted and ugly flowers and fruits, under the eye of this miracle worker, become wonders. Many thought George Morgan would remain a stenographer, but he always kept his eyes open, looked for an opportunity, promotions always stared him in the face, and he always reached the next rung. He was an astute observer. If it were not for his ability, with which he can see things quickly and absorb knowledge, he would never have progressed. The young man who wants to prosper must keep his eyes, ears and mind open. He must be quick, alert, prepared. I know a young Turk, who has only been in this country for a year, but he speaks our language fluently. He has studied the map, knows its geography, much of our history, as well as many of our resources and opportunities. He said that when he landed in New York, he seemed to see more opportunities, as he walked every block of our streets, than he had seen in all of Turkey. He could not understand the lethargy, lack of ambition, and indifference of our young people, to our wonderful possibilities. The efficient man is always growing, he is always accumulating knowledge of all kinds. He does not merely look with his eyes, he sees everything with his eyes. He keeps his ears open, and also his mind, to everything that is new, fresh and useful. Most people don't see things, they just look at them. The power of keen observation is indicative of a superior mentality, for it is the mind and not the optic nerve that really sees. Most people are too mentally lazy to look at things closely. Close observation is a powerful mental process. The mind is all the time working on the material which the eye brings it, considering, forming opinions, estimating, thinking, balancing and calculating. Careless and indifferent observation is not hidden from the eye. If the mind is not concentrated, the image is not sharp, and is not conveyed with sufficient force and sharpness to the brain, to enable it to arrive at the truth, and draw accurate conclusions. The faculty of observation is particularly susceptible to culture, and is capable of becoming a powerful power. Few people realize the tremendous success and happiness that can be achieved through the eye. The telegraph, the sewing machine, the telephone, the telescope, the wonders of electricity, all these are great inventions, which are due to the cultivated power of observing closely the world around us. Both in the past and in the present, this power has been instrumental in driving progress and innovation. Likewise, the achievements of modern machinery, which frees us from work, and scientific and artistic discoveries, also find their origin in this ability. The whole secret of a rich mind is alertness, sharp and reflective attention. Indifference, apathy and laziness are fatal to effective observation. It does not take long to develop a habit of attention, which captures the most important details of things. It is a wonderful exercise for children, to send them out into the street or any other place, just for the purpose of finding out how many things they can see, in a given time, and how closely they can observe them. The mere effort of trying to see how much they can remember, is a splendid exercise. Children are often fond of this exercise, which acquires inestimable value in their lives. All things being equal, the keen observer is the winner. Enter a business, with a calm gaze, and nothing escapes you. Ask yourself why the owner, in his 50 or 60 years, runs a business that a boy of 18 or 20 should know how to handle better. The reason is because he studies his employees and analyzes the situation. He may discover that he never recognized the value of good manners in his employees. He thought that if a guy was honest, he would be a good salesman, but maybe because of his rude manners, he is driving out the door the customers that the owner is trying to attract by advertisements. Before you enter his store, you will see in his showcases that he has no commercial vision, and that he does not detect the needs of potential buyers. If you keep your eyes open, in a short time you will be able to find out the reason why this man is not more successful. You can see that a little more knowledge of human nature would have revolutionized his whole business, multiplying by 10 times the income in a few years. You see, this man has not studied men, he does not know them. Wherever you go, study the situation and think, why doesn't this man do better? Why does he remain in mediocrity all his life? If you are having remarkable success, try to find out why. Keep your eyes and ears open, deduce from what you see and hear, trace the difficulties. Look for evidence of success or failure, everywhere. It will be one of the biggest factors in your own success. I learned that no man, on God's wide earth, is willing or able to help another man. All that I am, I have made myself. Han Fry affirmed. Be sure, my son, and remember that the best men are always self-made, said Patrick Henry. Hereditary servants do not know that those who want to be free must strike the blow, said Byron. He who waits to have his task marked out for him will die and leave his commission unfulfilled, expressed Lowell. Colonel Croquet is self-made, exclaimed a backwoods congressman, in reply to the exclamation of luxury from the White House, when he said, "Make room for Colonel Croquet." This extraordinary man, he was not afraid to oppose the head of a great nation, he preferred being right to being president. Although rude, uneducated and uncouth, Croquet was a man of great courage and determination. Poverty is uncomfortable, as James Garfield can attest, but 9 times out of 10, the best thing that can happen to a young man is to be thrown overboard and forced to sink or swim. In all my life, I never knew of a man who drowned and was worth saving. Garfield was the youngest member of the House of Representatives when he entered, and had only been in his seat 60 days, when his ability was recognized, and he was given his seat. He stepped forward, with the confidence of someone who belonged there. He succeeded, because everyone agreed that he could not be seen to be kept in the background. And because once at the front, he played his role, with a fearlessness and a commanding ease, which were but the evidences of the immense reserves of energy, which he could dispose of. Take your rightful place and attitude, says Emerson, and all men will agree. The world must be fair, let each man determine his own worth. A person under the firm conviction that he can dispose of resources practically already has them, says Lyman Richard Wright. The 13th child in the hovel, uneducated and without opportunity, gave the world his model of spinning, and put in the right hand of England a scepter, such as the Queen never wielded. A gypsy coppersmith fell deeply in love with the daughter of the painter Colantonio del Fiore, but was told that only a painter as good as the father should marry the maiden. They will give me 10 years to learn to paint, and thus have the right to the hand of his daughter, said the coppersmith. So, thinking that he would never again be bothered by the gypsy, the artist gave his consent. When the 10 years were about to end, the king's sister showed Colantonio a virgin with child, which the painter praised with much praise. His surprise was to learn that the gypsy was the artist. His great determination earned him the bride. Louis Philippe claimed that he was the only sovereign in Europe capable of ruling, since he could polish his own boots. When he was asked to change his family coat of arms, an American president of humble origin, he replied, "A pair of shirt sleeves do not make men more worthy, unless it is by nobility of soul and purpose." Those who have reached the greatest heights are those who do not know the starting point. They are those who have accumulated fortunes, and have turned adverse circumstances into an impulse to climb the steep mountain, where shines in the distance the proud temple of fame. To such men, every possible goal is attainable, and honest ambition has no limits, which genius or talent cannot reach. There is no sense in the tread of their feet. You can leave your millions to your son, but, have you really given him anything? You cannot transfer the personal benefit, acquired through learning and discipline. As are experience, power, sense of accomplishment, joy, pride and character, forged through trained habits of accuracy, method, promptness, patience, speed, honesty and courtesy. You cannot transfer the skill, shrewdness, prudence and foresight already hidden in your wealth. It meant a lot to you, but it means nothing to your heir. As you rose to your fortune, you developed the muscle, stamina and strength, which enabled you to maintain your lofty position, and keep your millions. You had the power, which is only acquired through experience, and it is that power, which enables you to stand firm in your lofty position. Your fortune was for you joy, knowledge, discipline and character. For him it will be a temptation, an anxiety that will probably make him feel small or inferior. For you it was wings, for him it will be dead weight. To you it was education and expansion of your higher faculties, to him it may mean starvation, lethargy, weakness and ignorance. You have taken away the need, the stimulus that has driven man, to almost all the great achievements, in the history of mankind. You thought it was a kindness to deprive you, so that your son could start where you left off. You thought to spare him the hard work, the deprivation, the lack of opportunity, the meager education you received. But you have put him on a crutch, instead of a cane. You have taken away the incentive to self-development, self-elevation, self-discipline and self-help. Without which, no real success, no real happiness, and no great character is possible. Your enthusiasm evaporates, your energy dissipates, and your ambition will gradually die out, if self-elevation is not encouraged. If you do everything for your son, and fight his battles for him, you will only have a weak son. I struggle, at 21, my life is a wreck, said the dying Cyrus White. My fortune is gone, my home is disgraced. I was so cruel to Edward, when I thought I was helping him. If I had been firm enough, to force my children to earn a living, then they would have known the meaning of money. His table was covered, with medals and certificates of honor from different nations, which recognized his great work, in uniting two continents in thought. Because of the fame he had earned, which he could never lose. However, pain shook the sands of life, when he only thought of the son who had brought misfortune to a once immaculate man. The wounds were sharper than those of a snake's tooth during the financial crisis of 1857. Maria Michel, who was visiting England, asked an English lady what happened to the daughters, when no property was left to them. They live off their brothers, was the answer. But what about the American daughters? Maria asked the English lady. When they have no money left, they earn it, was the answer of Mrs. Michel. Men who have been protected all their lives are rarely useful in a crisis situation. When misfortune comes, they look around them, for someone to lean on. If they don't find support, then they sink. And once down, they are as helpless as overturned turtles, or warriors without armor. Many frontier boys have succeeded beyond their expectations, simply because all their supports fell apart before their time, and they were forced to fend for themselves. A man's best friends are his days and his fingers, said Robert Collier, who brought his wife to America, in the tourist class. There is no such thing as a factory of men, which takes in boys and turns them into men. What you call, no chance, may be your only chance. Don't wait for someone to give you your place, but give it to yourself. Don't wait for someone to lift you up, do it yourself. Henry Ward did not wait to be called by a church with an acceptable salary. He accepted the first pastorate he was offered, in a small town near Cincinnati. He literally became the light of the church, as he was in charge of lighting the lights, fires, sweeping the rooms and ringing the bell. His salary was only about $200 a year, but he knew that a good church and a big salary cannot make a great man. What he wanted was work and opportunity. He felt that if there was anything in him, work would bring it out. When Beethoven was examining Marshall's work, he found written at the end, "Finished with God's help." He wrote underneath, "Man, help yourself." A young boy listlessly watched some fishermen on a bridge. He was poor, and he was sad. At last, approaching a basket full of fish, he sighed, "If I had these now, I would be happy. I could sell them, to buy food and lodging." "I will give you as many as good," said the owner, who happened to overhear his words. "If you do me a small favor." "And what is it?" asked the young man. "You just have to attend to this line until I come back, as I have a little errand to run." The proposal was gladly accepted. The old man took so long, that the young man began to grow impatient. In the meantime, the fish were greedily biting the hook, and he left his sadness behind, catching them with excitement. When the owner returned, there were many fish. Then he said to the young man, "I keep my promise to teach you, not to waste your time on unnecessary desires, but you must put effort into yourself, just as you did when you caught those fish." A storm surprised a group of tourists on a lake in Scotland, and threatened to sink the boat. When it seemed that the crisis had arrived, the largest and strongest man in the group, with intense fear, commented, "Let's pray." "Of that nothing, man," shouted the old boatman. "Let the little fellow pray, and you take an oar." The greatest fortunes, ever accumulated or possessed on earth, were and are the fruit of efforts, which had no capital to begin with, except energy, intellect and will. From Carnegie to Rockefeller, the story is the same, not only in the acquisition of wealth, but also of fame. Those men who have earned the most, are the ones who have relied the most on themselves. The male residents, of Lorford Dum Township, in Hayworth County, according to a printed pamphlet, were facing great hardship, due to the absence of a passable road, between Libertine and Pentway. Therefore, they requested that a property tax be created, throughout the county, for the purpose of laying out a paved road. Each one is the author of his own fortune. Says Sallust, "Man is not only the architect of his own destiny, but he himself must lay the bricks." Taylor, at the age of 23, wrote, "I will become the sculptor of the statue, of my own mind." His biography shows how many times he had in his hands the chisel and the hammer to give shape to his ideal. Work is the only legal tender, which works all over the world. In search of true success, the gods do not make concessions, because of which, you will never find lowered success. The entrance to the temple of success always remains closed, so each individual who enters must forge his own door, which closes behind him for others. Circumstances have rarely favored great men, rather they have triumphed, through the path of difficulty and obstacles. A humble beginning and a humble origin, are not an obstacle to a great career. The farmers' sons, occupy today, many of the most important positions in legislatures, in business, in the bar, in pulpits and in Congress. Young men of humble origin, have made many of the most important discoveries. They are presidents of our banks, of our colleges, of our universities. Our poor boys and girls, have written many of our best books, and have occupied the highest positions, as professors and journalists. Ask any successful man in our metropolises, and he will answer that he was born on a farm, or in a quaint rural village. The vast majority of urban entrepreneurs, have their origins in the countryside. The founder of Boston University, left Cape Cod for Boston, to make his way, with a capital of only $4. Like Horace Greeley, he found no place, for a boy with those conditions. But that did not matter, for he made a place for himself. He found a board, and turned it into an oyster stand on the street corner. He borrowed a wheelbarrow, and drove 5 miles to an oyster farm. He bought 3 bushels of oysters, and took them to his stand. Soon, his small savings amounted to $130, and with it, he was able to buy a horse and cart. Self-help has accomplished almost every great thing in the world. There are many young people who falter, get discouraged and abandon their aspirations, due to lack of resources to start, hoping that fortune will give them a boost. But success is the child of hard work and perseverance. It cannot be cheated or bribed. You must pay the price, and then it will be yours. What profession today has less opportunity for advancement than blacksmithing? I knew a young blacksmith apprentice, named Burrid, who worked hard in the forge shop, all day long, and often by candlelight. However, he found time and opportunities to study. He always carried a book with him, even when he was eating, and took advantage of every free moment. During the evenings and vacations, she dedicated herself to acquiring knowledge, and sought a quality education. He took advantage of the time, which most boys waste. While the rich boy and the lazy boy yawned, stretched and just woke up, the young Burrid had already taken advantage of that time to continue studying, and thus improve. At the age of 30, he had mastered all the important languages of Europe, and was studying those of Asia. What chance did such a boy have of standing out? It is likely that no young man with limited opportunities would read this book. However, his thirst for knowledge and his eagerness to excel will overcome all the obstacles that will come his way. Young Americans, faced with adverse circumstances, should understand that 90% of what is considered genius is actually the result of perseverance and determination. In most cases, hard work becomes the prison of a single idea, giving many mediocre individuals the reputation of being geniuses. It is interesting to note that the men who speak most of genius are those who like to work the least. The lazier the man, the more he talks and the more he complains of those who excel. The greatest geniuses have been hard workers. Sheridan was considered one of them, but it was discovered that the brilliant and out of place, with which he used to dazzle the House of Commons, was elaborate, polished and reworked. He had it down in his book, and ready for any emergency. Genius has been described as the inexhaustible ability to persevere. If men of great success could reveal to the struggling youth of today how much of their reputation is due to effort and hard work, what inspiration and motivation they would give. How often have I wished that the discouraged and struggling youth could know the heartaches, the headaches, and the nervousness. The difficult trials, the demotivation, the fears, and despair involved, in works which have won the admiration of the world, but which have put to the test, the utmost powers of their authors. Reading a poem or a book can be fun and entertaining, but the effort and hard work required to write it can be surprising and overwhelming. It often takes days, months or even years to complete a literary work. The greatest works of literature have been worked on line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and often rewritten a dozen times. It is incredible, the work that the writers have dedicated to their works, which have been maintained over time. Lucretius worked almost all his life on a poem, which completely absorbed his life. John Foster sometimes entertained a week with a single phrase, cut it, split it, pruned it, uprooted it, or applied any other necessary action, until he obtained his consent to exist. Chalmers was once asked what Foster was doing in London hard at work, and he replied, at the rate of £1 a week. Even Lord Bacon, one of the greatest geniuses who ever lived, when he died, left a large number of manuscripts, full of sudden thoughts, available to all. Hunt worked 13 hours a day, on his History of England. Lord Elton perplexed the world with his impressive legal knowledge. However, during his student days, when he lacked the resources to acquire books, in fact, he made use of the practice of borrowing and copying numerous pages of important legal works. On the other hand, Matthew Hale devoted years to study law, investing up to 16 hours a day in his learning. Speaking of Fox, someone stated that he wrote, drop by drop. Rosa says of the work involved in his smooth and lively style, my stained, scratched and barely legible manuscripts testify to the work they cost me. There is not a single one of them that I have not been forced to transcribe 4 or 5 times before going to press. In some periods, I have turned them over in my head for 5 or 6 nights, before they were in a condition to be put to paper. Beethoven probably surpassed all other musicians in his meticulous fidelity and persistent application. There is not a bar in his music that has not been written and rewritten at least a dozen times. His favorite maxim was, the barriers have not yet been erected, which can say to persevering talents, so far nothing more. Vivum wrote his autobiography 9 times, and was in his studio every morning, summer and winter, at 6 o'clock. And yet, young people who waste their evenings, marvel at the genius, which produced the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, on which Gibbon worked 20 years. Even Plato, one of the greatest writers who ever lived, wrote the first sentence of his Republic 9 different ways, before he was satisfied with it. Burke wrote the conclusion of his speech, at the Hastings trial, as many as 16 times, and Butler his famous analogy, more than 20 times. It took him 7 years to write his Georgics, and 12 to write the Aeneid. He was not so displeased. Jane was very poor, his father was a coachman, and his solitary and friendless. He married a servant, and was sent away from home, to be an errand boy for a music teacher. He absorbed much information, but had a hard life of persecutions, until he became a barber in Vienna. There he blackened boots for an influential man, who befriended him. In 1798, this poor boy's oratorio, The Creation, reached the world of music. Reached the world of music, like the rising of a new sun, which never set. He was courted by princes, and dined with kings and queens. He became famous, barbershops and poverty ended, but of his 800 compositions, The Creation eclipsed them all. It is known that he died, while Napoleon's cannons bombarded Vienna, and some of the shots fell in his garden. When a man like Lord Cavendish, with neither arms nor legs, gets into Parliament, when a man like Francis Joseph Campbell, blind, becomes a distinguished mathematician, musician and great philanthropist, then we get an indication of what it means to make the most of ourselves and our opportunities. Perhaps 99 out of 100 people, in such unfortunate circumstances, would be content to be helpless objects of charity for life. If your vocation is to acquire economic power, instead of intellectual power, to acquire world power, instead of professional power, double, whatever your talent. Similarly, an apprentice glove maker from Glasgow, Scotland, who was so poor, he could not even afford a candle, and who studied the light from the street poles. When the stores were closed, he would climb the lamppost with his book in one hand, and holding on with the other. This poor boy, with less chance than the average boy in America, became the most eminent scholar in all of Scotland. Franklin Parkman, who was half blind, became one of the greatest historians in America, in spite of everything, because he was self-made. Personal courage is self-made. Franklin was but a poor printing boy, whose greatest luxury at one time was only a penny roll, which he bought on the streets of Philadelphia. Michael Faraday was a poor boy, the son of a blacksmith, who at the age of 13, was apprenticed to a London bookbinder. Michael laid the foundation of his future greatness, familiarizing himself with the contents of the books he bound. He would stay overnight, after the others had left, in order to read and study the precious volumes. A French doctor once mocked Fletcher, Bishop of Nimes, who had been a bait seller in his youth, for the meanness of his origin. To which he replied, "If you had been born in the same conditions as me, you would have been nothing but a candlestick maker." In his report to the British Parliament, Edwin Chadwick argued that children who combined half a day's work devoting 3 hours to study, and the rest of the time outdoors, achieved a remarkable intellectual advancement. During the year, businessmen have often achieved wonders, during the busiest lives, just by devoting 1, 2, 3, or 4 hours a day, to study or other literary work. James Wood only received the basic knowledge at school, as his attendance was irregular, owing to his delicate health. However, he more than made up for all his deficiencies by the diligence with which he pursued his studies at home. Alexander V was a beggar, who was born in a bar, and died in marble. William Herschel, placed at the age of 14, as a musician in the band of the Hanoverian Guard, devoted all his spare time to philosophical studies. He acquired a wealth of knowledge, general and in astronomy, science in which he was totally self-taught. His discoveries entitled him to be among the greatest astronomers of all time. George Washington was the son of a widow, born under the roof of a Westmoreland farmer. Almost from infancy, his lot had been that of an orphan. No academy had welcomed him into its shadow, no university had crowned him with its honors. Reading, writing, ciphering, these had been his degrees of knowledge. At school, Shakespeare learned no more than to read and write, but being self-taught, he became the great teacher among the literati. Burns also enjoyed few educational advantages, and his youth was spent in miserable poverty. James Ferguson, the son of a poor farmer, learned to read, by listening to what one of his elder brothers recited. Being just a child, he discovered several mechanical principles, and with models of mills and spinning wheels, and by means of beads strung on strings, he made an excellent map of the sky. Ferguson did extraordinary things with a simple knife. A great many men have ascended to the summit of knowledge by paths little trodden. Gifford solved his intricate problems with a shoemaker's awl in a piece of leather. Rittenhouse calculated eclipses for the first time on the handle of his plow. Columbus, although he led a seafaring life, managed to become the most accomplished geographer and astronomer of his time. When Peter the Great, a boy of 17, became the absolute ruler of Russia, his subjects were savages. And in himself, even passions and inclinations to barbarism were so strong that were frequently exhibited throughout his career. However, he decided to transform himself and the Russians into civilized people. He instituted reforms with great energy, and at the age of 26, he visited other countries of Europe, with the purpose of knowing their arts and institutions. In Holland, he was so impressed by the sights of the great East India shipyard, that he apprenticed himself to a shipbuilder, and helped to build the St. Peter, which he soon bought. Continuing his travels, having learned his trade, he worked in England in paper mills, saw mills, cordwainers, watchmakers and other manufactures, receiving the treatment of a common laborer. When he traveled, his constant habit was to obtain beforehand all the information he could, in regard to every place he was going to visit, and he always demanded, "Let me see everything." When he undertook his investigations, he carried his tablets in his hand, and whatever he considered worthy of remembrance, he carefully noted down. He would often leave his carriage, if he saw the country people at work by the roadside. And he not only engaged in conversation with them, on agricultural matters, but also accompanied them to their houses, examined their furniture, and took sketches of their farming tools. Thus he gained much knowledge, accurate and detailed, which he would hardly have acquired by other means, and which he later used admirably, in the improvement of his own country. Some ancients used to say, "Know thyself," and in the 20th century it is said, "Help thyself." Self-culture gives a second birth to the soul. A liberal education is a real regeneration. When a man receives a liberal education, as a rule, he will remain a man, he will not shrink into a dummy, nor will he shrink into a brute. However, if he has not been properly educated, if he has only been crammed with information at college, if he has only a memory, such as to remember enough to pass an examination, then he will continue to shrink below his true capabilities. Because he will lose both his confidence, as well as his self-esteem. Education or culture are of great advantage in the struggle for existence. The microscope creates nothing new, but reveals wonders. Educating the eye increases its capacity, until it sees beauty where before it saw only ugliness, reveals a world, which we had never before imagined, and even finds beauty, in the most common things. Likewise, the eye of an inspired person could have worlds, that the uneducated eye never dreamed of. The educated hand can do 1,000 things, which the uneducated hand cannot. It becomes graceful, strong, skillful. The educated will can hold a man, with superhuman effort. The educated touch, can almost work miracles. Cultured taste can accomplish wonders. What a contrast between the cultured reason, and masterly logic of a Claxton, and that of a wheelwright, who has never developed or educated his reason, beyond what is necessary, with which to enable him to mix mortar, and carry bricks. Beware of such over-education, which may lead to a want of moral energy. A professor at one of our universities, has observed that the mind, may also be developed and balanced by education, but that it does not have the capacity, to act strongly in any area. On the other hand, those who have not been educated in this way, feel their deficiency, and the sharp corners of their knowledge, lead them to strive to fill up the chasms. Thus making them better educated men than those who have only enough knowledge to avoid the consciousness of their ignorance. Although all mental abilities should be cultivated, it is desirable, to have at least 2 or 3 rude traits of great strength. Young people are too prone, to forget the real aim of life, which is to act and do, not just read and meditate, on what others have done. I repeat that my goal is not to give you knowledge, but to teach you to acquire it, when you need it. Rousseau said, all learning is autodidactic, and on the work of the pupil's own mind, depends his progress in knowledge. The great task of the teacher is to teach the student to teach himself. Thinking, not growing, makes manhood, says Isaac Taylor. You must then accustom yourself to think, and set out to understand everything you see. To unite thinking with reading, is one of the first maxims, and one of the easiest operations. Very few are those who think justly, and many are those who think they think, though in reality they do not. If you liked this audiobook, and you want to listen to other similar ones, check out the video description. Thank you for your visit.